Hello and welcome to Real Person Reviews. My name is Sam, and I'm a real person. And today I want to talk to you about Conker's Pocket Tales for the Game Boy. And I wanted to do this because I wanted this 101st episode of Real Person Reviews to kind of mirror my very first one, which, if you remember, was Conker's Bad Fur Day. And since there aren't that many Conker games out there, like 2 and a remake, well, when was I going to get another chance like this? And it just kind of happened this way. I happened to get this game around the time that I was close to 100 or so, and I made a judgment call, and here we are, and now we all have to live with it. I guess for the stuff up front, this is actually an interesting one, I guess, just to me also because it's similar to the Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge thing, where you're taking kind of this idea of what you're used to from the Nintendo 64 and then playing a handheld version of it, which is incapable of that kind of 3D. But this is a little different than that, too. I mean, it's a similar concept, except that this was actually put out earlier than Conker's Bad Fur Day. And the Conker in this game is more of a kid-friendly kind of Conker, kind of like the one you see in Diddy Kong Racing. This is before, this is basically when they were making Conker 12 Tales, and it was probably made more like a handheld tie-in to that, which is why it's called Conker's Pocket Tales. And this was before they made that whole shift to Conker's Bad Fur Day. And so it was kind of interesting to see how different this is, and taking these concepts of what would have been more like the Conker 12 Tales game, put onto a handheld. So it's kind of interesting in that sense, just like Banjo-Kazooie stuff, trying to do that on the Game Boy Advance, except that they had something to base it off of that actually came out, and this now doesn't, because that game never happened. So that's, I thought that was kind of interesting, the strange sort of similarities there, and all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, I've got a written review, like always, you can check out before, after, or instead of this one, which you can go to the link in the description, or go to hubworldhq.com, it'll be there. I guess the other thing is just that I played it on a Game Boy Advance SP. Apparently it has a few differences between if you play it on the Game Boy Color, or Game Boy Advance stuff will do that as well, or if you play it on original Game Boy variant like the Game Boy or Game Boy Pocket. And besides not having color on the other one, on the Game Boy, normal Game Boy or Game Boy Pocket, along with not having color, they changed the save points a little bit so that you have to save at specific spots rather than wherever you want. And I think they said some of the map layout was different, but I couldn't really test that as I don't have a Game Boy or Game Boy Pocket to really do that, so I'm really talking about the Game Boy Color version of it, I suppose, but it's one of those Game Boy Other cartridges, so that's why I'm calling it a Game Boy game, because you can play it in a Game Boy as well. Alright, well, I think that pretty much hits all the stuff I needed to, other than, one last thing, which I suppose I should bring up, even if it's going to ruin some of the flow. I didn't beat the game. And I tried my damnedest, but I got stuck on a part that I just could not beat for the life of me, and you'll hear about that when I come to it. But because of that, if you don't really want to hear what I have to say about the game, because I haven't been able to get all the way through all of it, I understand. You can leave, and I get it. Like, you might not trust my opinion on that. It's possible the game gets way better or way worse or just way different after that specific part. I wouldn't know. I can't get there. But if you'd like to hear about that and why there is a part like that in there, for me, at least. You can keep listening and you can hear about, I think it's maybe half the game or so. I don't know, something like that. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And you can still make some decisions based on what you hear there, so kind of weird for that, and not how I would have preferred it, but I just cannot beat it. So it was either this, on what I do know, or just not do the review at all. And I figured, well, fuck that, I still got stuff to say about this game, so let's hear about that. So the plot is pretty basic. It's Conker's birthday, but then this evil acorn shows up. It's called the evil acorn. And it kidnaps his friends and takes all of his presents. And so he has to go save his friends and reclaim his presents. And that's how you end up with this collect-a-thon top-down adventure with puzzle elements in it as well. That's pretty much that's the plot. You start off, and early on you can walk, you can run by double tapping in a direction, you can jump, and you can do a ground pound by double tapping jump. The ground pound can hurt enemies and hit certain switches. Running allows you to then, of course, move faster, but also jump across larger gaps and just make longer jumps. You have health, which is indicated by acorns. You start off with 4, and you can keep collecting acorns that are around, and I don't know that there's a cap, or if there is one, it's so high you'll never probably reach it. But there are a limited amount of acorns around to get your health back. If your health does go below 4, whenever you start the game over again, by saving and then reloading, you'll go back up to 4. And also, if you die and get a game over, you come back, you'll start with 4. So just whatever reloading, you'll get 4. Also, pretty early on, you'll be pointed in this direction to go and talk to this forest guardian, who kind of is the one that keeps pointing you where to go next in the game. As you have this big, kind of like a hub world that leads you to other worlds, essentially. And you, very early on, will get a slingshot from him before you can really go into your first actual world. And the slingshot allows you to shoot projectiles, and these are nuts called Conkers. Hey, it's the name. And you can pick this ammo up around on the ground, so it does run on an ammo system. It's not just you get the ability to do it. And these can hit enemies from afar. You're able to move in 8 directions, and you can fire in 8 directions because of that. But you can only fire diagonally if you're moving in that direction, as you can't stand idly and face in a diagonal. And after that, you can start going to these worlds, checking them out. And typically what happens is you go into a world, and then in order to even exit the world, you have to get a certain amount of presents. There are 2 kinds of presents. There are blue presents, and those are the ones you're going to be getting most of the time. You just get those for going through and exploring. You'll find spots where there are those presents. There'll be some challenges, like trying to defeat a bunch of enemies in an area can get you presents, or defeating a mini-boss can get you a blue present. There are also puzzle rooms which can give you them, where you have to do things like, basically there are 2 main types of puzzles. One is hitting floor switches, where you just have to hit these, or pound these switches in a certain order. And then there are these box sliding puzzles, where you have to knock boxes into holes without any of them getting stuck. And if you mess up in there, you can pause it and then unpause it, and whenever you do that, you basically restart at the beginning part of the current room or area you went to, which also is why the saving works that way. When you restart, you'll start from that spot, because it's like you have to unpause it from there. And it'll then reset all the stuff that's in there. There are also red presents you can get, which don't actually, I don't think they count towards the required amount of presents. That I wasn't entirely sure on. And there's also party invites you can find in these envelopes that are hanging out. And usually these red presents and these invites are more hidden items that are optional, and are mostly there for you to get I don't know if it's a better ending or something at the end for doing it, but you definitely get an improved rank as you go along, as indicated by a title that's on your pause screen. So every once in a while, it'll tell you that you've been called, you're called something else now, kind of similar to something like Toe Jam and Earl making so much progress, and they start saying that their character is a this or a that, and it's just kind of for comedic effect, I suppose. And at the end of each world, you usually will have to fight a boss, and that might require you to do the ground pound. It might require you to use your Conker. It really just depends on the boss and what they do. Also, as you go along, usually in each world you'll have to do something with a key item. Sometimes key items are just used as something to trade for someone, so you have to find them and get them and then bring those items back to whoever needs them. Sometimes the key items are something you'll get that actually gives you a new ability, such as getting an item that allows you to swim underwater to access new areas. And it just opens up more things to you, and sometimes you'll have to go back to previous areas in order to get things you couldn't get before because you now have new items. And essentially, you just keep doing this until you get all the required presents, you fight the final boss, and then beat the game, I presume. And then that's it, as far as I know. Of course, I didn't quite get there, but like I said, I'll bring that up, don't worry. As far as positives for this game, I do think it does some pretty neat stuff. It's cool to see this collect-a-thon thing done on the Game Boy of all systems. It wasn't a real popular thing to see on handhelds like that, or done very well if it was there. And I think this one is done fairly well with the way things are kind of hidden. You have to explore, you have little tasks to do in order to get the stuff. I think they did a pretty good job of bringing that formula to something like the Game Boy. Some of the music is catchy. Visually, it's very colorful, and it's pretty detailed with some of the visuals as well. I thought the puzzles were pretty fun, and also it could be pretty tough with fighting some of these enemies. They're usually pretty simple, but you have to be careful when fighting them because they can hurt you, and of course because health doesn't grow on trees. I mean, they're acorns, so I guess they do grow on trees, but because you can't have a really reliable way of getting a bunch of health back, you probably want to try and avoid taking damage, and so you have to be careful with this game. You also have to be skillful and have proper timing for things. So you kind of have to have a balance of knowing when to solve puzzles, knowing when to be defensive and when to be, offensive, when to fight and when to run, that kind of thing. A lot of that works into it because it's in a challenging way and not in a super cheap or unfair way. I even think that there are these enemies that are actually pretty interesting that shoot projectiles towards you, and they can shoot projectiles through walls and stuff. I think I forget if they could do that or not, but basically there are these plants that can shoot these projectiles at you, and it's interesting because they'll actually lead your movements. So if you're moving in some direction, you won't just automatically be safe because it shoots behind you, because it doesn't shoot directly where you are, it shoots where you're going, so you have to kind of fake it out and make it shoot in a way to where you're not going to be, let the shot pass and then move. That's a simple thing, but it's interesting to see that implemented into a Game Boy game, which I wouldn't think they would have the AI like that. And so it kind of keeps you on your toes, and you have to pay attention, and it works well with the pacing of all that. And it's just fun to explore and collect stuff, to get new abilities, to help you explore more and collect more, and the general structure of the game, I think, is pretty solid, even if the premise is, admittedly thin. It doesn't really need a great premise to be fun, especially with this kind of gameplay. It's not really about having a great story for something like this. But it's has problems. It does. One of the things that the control is a little awkward. You have a top-down view, so of course jumping is going to be awkward. How do you really see jumping from a top-down view? It can be tough to get that down correctly. Sometimes you'll think you're going to jump over something that you end up hitting anyways because it's a weird hitbox and all that. Sometimes it's just kind of hard to see when should you jump to make your jumps. to get over a hole or some spikes or something. The ground pound is also kind of finicky. You have to get it kind of precise. If you're a little too late or a little too early, you won't do the ground pound. Also, the ground pound stops your momentum in the air, so if you start to do a ground pound when you're running and jumping, you'll immediately smash down where you were, and if you're running and still holding that direction, when you land, you'll continue running in that same direction right away off of that. You run so fast that sometimes you end up running into enemies because the screen is so close up and you move so quickly that you don't have enough time to really react to them. And hitboxes are kind of weird too because you're a fairly large sprite, but not all of you is necessarily a hitbox. It's just hard to tell what part of you is and is not a hitbox. And sometimes enemy hitboxes can be kind of frustrating as well. Shooting diagonally can be an issue because, like I said, you have to be moving when you're doing it. You can't just stand still and shoot diagonally, so that can be kind of a pain. And sometimes when you try to shoot diagonally, you either shoot to one of the sides or up or down instead of the diagonal. And sometimes you just don't fire at all, and I don't know what the specific rhythm is or if there's something that cancels frames of animation that messes up timing or something. I don't know, but it seems like sometimes unreliable to get a good stream of shots off with your slingshot. And I don't know, like basically the health and ammo thing can be really unforgiving at times. Like the ammo is okay. Basically the ammo is not unforgiving. I guess it's just tedious. Usually if you don't go too far off screen, the ammo respawns. Though it seems like enemies will respawn before ammo does. You could easily farm up and get a bunch of ammo in some spot though that's easy for you to go to. But that's still, like, just because it's easy doesn't mean it's all that great. It's still kind of tedious to do that. And since you can't really rely on your ground pound too much, you'll want to have a lot of ammo. And you can't really rely on your ground pound mainly in the sense that a lot of times because of the weird hitboxes and the weird timing and the perspective, you'll end up either taking damage before you do the pound, or your pound will miss and the enemy will just hit you. Sometimes, basically, the worst case scenario is you end up missing them with your pound, and they still end up hitting you anyways. And if you're super lucky, you'll end up getting the hit and not get hurt. But a lot of enemies take more than one ground pound to kill anyways. So basically, what's going to happen is you're going to pound them, and most of the time you're either going to pound them and miss, nothing happens, or you're going to pound and hit them, but they hit you also, and that's really frustrating. Especially because the health, I don't know what makes it respawn. I think I noticed it respawn once in the main hub, and that was it. And it doesn't really like to come back very often. So if you start running out of health, basically the game is that much harder. And you always can have at least 4 health, I suppose, but a lot of parts of the game, especially with how finicky it is and the weird hitboxes, it can be really a big pain in the ass to do that. I guess what essentially happens is either the game is a lot harder all of a sudden because you're in a harder area where you don't have health anymore. You're used to having this, this big surplus of health, or you have so much health that the place just isn't difficult at all, and it's not really about your skill, just how much health you happen to have, and you can just make as many mistakes as you need to. Also, some of the music is a little, sounds a little like generic, meaty Game Boy music at times, so there's also that. But the real story here that you want to get to is why couldn't I finish this game? Why did I have to stop? Why couldn't I beat it? And the answer is just that I got to an impossible boss. Or not impossible, but near impossible, let's say. An improbable boss. Where it's called Swamp Fiend. In the swamp area. And I only had 5 health when I got to him, which apparently was my mistake, that I happened to not have enough health. Even though that's still one more than the minimum amount you could, you generally have to go in and fight them, usually. I guess not minimum, but your usual amount for restarting, right? Okay, so the Swamp Fiend is, basically this hand that is, hidden under this, arena of mud. It's kind of like a hexagon of mud, basically. and the few corners of this square arena are grassy corners where you're safe from it. You move slowly in the mud unless you're jumping. So even if you're walking or running, you're still moving more slowly than you usually would unless you jump. This boss cannot be hurt by Conkers, so that's out. So you have to rely on the already questionable ground pounding technique. But to make matters worse is that this boss can come up out of the ground and basically tries to slap you with its hand. It's just a big hand, and it tries to slap you when it comes out. You have to be able to get out of its slapping range to avoid damage. You have to get close enough to it to do the ground pound to hurt it, and you have to do all this before it goes back underneath the mud and starts chasing you again. And you can kind of see where it is, but it's super difficult, especially if you're not on like a backlit Game Boy Advance SP. I'm on the frontlit one and I can barely see it. If you're playing on a regular Game Boy Advance and below, I mean, he's basically invisible. It's hard to see his very faint circle shadow thing under the mud. And what happens is he'll keep just coming up out of the ground. You have to keep avoiding him and pounding. And your one advantage here is that you can be slightly out of his range of hurting you while also being able to still pound and do damage to him. So if you get the spacing just right, you can hurt him without risk of you being hurt as well. That's if you get the right angle on him, if he comes out of the mud the right way, and if your timing and everything is timing and spacing is very precise. So that's already difficult. The problem is that after doing so many hits, another hand spawns, and then another one after so many hits on those, and I don't know if it does even any more than 3 hands or not. But basically, when you have all these hands, multiple hands coming at you, what happens is you really don't have any windows of safety anymore. You're jumping, and you're trying to jump and get the slam down on one of the hands, and by the time you can do that, another hand is already hitting you, or coming out of the ground to hit you. You have to keep moving, and there really aren't many windows of opportunity, and especially with the finicky nature of this, even with those few windows of opportunity, there's not really a guarantee that you're going to succeed with it. And I was so frustrated with this boss that I had to look stuff up online. I was desperate. I was like, I just want to beat it. And even online help was really not that helpful. The strategy they told me to do was to sit in the corner and to try to just continually do the ground pound and kill them. They also kind of mentioned, though, that you will probably still get hit, and you kind of have to hope to get lucky and not get hit more times than it takes, for them to die. And I tried that multiple times. I could not get it to work no matter how I tried to finesse it. It just wouldn't happen. I tried running around the arena and then just trying to jump and do the pound, when it was safe, but then that was also unreliable. That didn't work. And one of the few people that I did see that few people that I saw were beating it, they were admitting to using an emulator and using cheats, because there's not even cheats for the physical game. So basically, people had to cheat their way through this part. Nobody was like, this is a fun boss. It was like, yeah, you just have to either get lucky or have enough health to outlast it. Or, worst case scenario, you cheat. And since I didn't really have the ability to do any of that shit, I was kind of shit out of luck. The only way I could really reliably beat this would be to start the entire fucking game over again, go all the way back to the beginning, try not to get hurt as much on my way to the boss, and then have enough health to just outlast it. And get lucky one of my attempts. And that's, that's, I guess, possible. And it's possible the stuff past this is fun. But how would you know when something so bullshit is just sticking in here? Like, you should be able to beat it with your 4 health that you could start with. That should be a thing you can do for all of the game. And I understand it would be harder, but this is damn near impossible to do like this. So I really had no choice but to either try to replay the entire game again, or judge it honestly like a real person would, who probably wouldn't want to sit down and play through the entire fucking thing again just to get through one bullshit boss you shouldn't have to do because you didn't have enough health when you got there the first time. Because how the fuck would you even know? How would you ever know without looking that up beforehand, especially with a game that isn't talked about that much anyways? It's fucking ridiculous. Conker's Pocket Tales. Look, I was willing to forgive a lot of stuff with this one. Alright, it's a Game Boy game trying to do the collect-a-thon thing. I get it. It's trying to bring Conker from 3D to 2D, even though that Conker in 3D never happened. You get the idea. They did a pretty nice job of doing those concepts, and there's some good stuff in here. Some of this game is pretty fun when it works. It can be pretty hard. It can be a little bullshit at times, but it was still pretty fun, and felt like kind of a challenge, and had a neat pacing to it. I was even willing to forgive that, this isn't the same Conker you're used to in Conker's Bad Fur Day. And I was willing to let a lot of stuff go, and try to enjoy this game for what it is and not what I want it to be. But with that boss, I just can't let that go. Only if you're lucky enough to have enough health there, or, to get super lucky to beat it. Either way, it's not something you should have to do, and it's not a good game just because you can technically do that. Even if the rest of the game after that is way better, it wouldn't make up for the bullshit you have to go through just to get there. And who knows, it could be way worse. It could be entirely different. I don't know. And you know what? I don't care enough to go back all the way through it right now and find out. Maybe some other day, but what it comes down to is that Conker's Pocket Tales is a game that I guess I would only recommend to very big fans of Conker, or fans of Rare, whatever. It was a Rareware title, I suppose. If you're fans of Rare and you want to see all of these games they've done, and I guess the Rareware logo doesn't necessarily mean that you got a high quality game. Clearly, I don't know. Get it for cheap if you're gonna get it at all. Get it for cheap. That price isn't too bad, I guess, just to see, but knowing that it has this bullshit shit in it, try to get it for less if you can. Why not? As a general game, I don't recommend it, only to those very die-hard Rare and or Conker fans. That's really the only people it's going to appeal to. And even then, you're probably going to be like, oh, that's interesting, but yeah, fuck a lot of that, and you probably won't want to play it again, even if you're able to get over that shit. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Conker's Pocket Tales. Have you guys played this one? And if you have, what do you think of it? How do you think it compares to Conker's Bad Fur Day, or Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge? Just share your thoughts on this one if you've even played it, as it's one of those games I think was forgotten. You don't hear about it much, and it's not exactly a hidden gem. I think this one was forgotten for a good reason. It just wasn't that good. I don't know. Hopefully the 201st episode doesn't go as poorly as this.